From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
I am thrilled to introduce our next author, DJ MacHale, because I'm grateful to him. I'm a librarian. I love to read. I love books. But my son, who's now in college, didn't really like to read books when he was a kid. He was active. He liked to be outside playing sports. And when he was inside, he wanted to play video games. But in 6th grade, he got the first book of the Pendragon series and couldn't put it down. Through the fast-paced intergalactic adventures of Bobby Pendragon, my son learned that reading a good story can be as exciting and as fun as sports and video games. And that was a wonderful discovery. DJ MacHale has had a varied and fascinating career. His Pendragon and Morpheus Road series are bestsellers, and he's also a writer, director, and producer of popular television programs. The first book of his newest trilogy, Sylo, has just been published and offers readers another compelling mix of adventure, mystery, and science fiction. Please join me in welcoming to the stage DJ MacHale.
Attention, all books are property of U.S. government, must remain within pavilion at all times. Was I supposed to read that? I don't know. Oh, author introduction disclaimer. Okay, never mind. Hi, everybody. Wow, this is a great turnout. Isn't this the best festival in the world? Good night, Cleveland. No, I say that all the time. I mean, no, I don't say that all the time. But seriously, I've been to festivals all over the country, and this is really pretty special. And not just the festival, but of course the setting here. Oh my gosh, this is phenomenal. So I'm really honored to be here. And I thank you very much for coming to hear me talk a little bit. I've had I always love when there's an interpreter next to me. I try to challenge them. It's like, and give me the recipe on how to make, no, I'm not going to do that. I've had the very, very good fortune of having a career of writing stories for young people. And what better job is there than that? I mean, I do think it's somewhere beneath people with real jobs and somewhere above mimes. I'm not sure about that, but still, I think it's very important. It's very valuable, and I feel a little guilty because I love doing it so much. So to earn a living doing something you love is really pretty special. I feel myself very fortunate. But I started out as a filmmaker. Is anyone familiar with the TV shows I made by any chance? Maybe, the interesting thing, at least to me, I think, is that what really led me to being a writer is an absolute hatred of writing when I was in school. And I don't say that just for the laugh, but it really is true. When I was in grade school and in middle school and high school, I absolutely hated to write. I hated everything there was to do with writing. I hated having to sit still in a chair. I hated not watching television. I hated not hanging around with my friends. I hated looking at a blank piece of paper I had to fill up with words I did not care about. I hated grammar, sentence structure, spelling. I still hate spelling. Whoever that guy is who invented spell checker, he is my hero. He deserves a great, talk about a Hall of Fame, spell checker, you're the guy. I use his work every day. But because I hated to write so much, it actually put me on a path to becoming a writer. And one of the reasons for that is that, and I like to say this to young people all over, that you know that all teachers are great, right? Okay, most teachers are great. Most teachers are at least very good, but every once in a while you're going to come across a teacher or two, hopefully you'll do this, who knows a little bit more about you than you know about yourself, and they may suggest that you do something. They say, hey, did you ever try doing this? Whatever this is. And to all the young people in the audience, I suggest do this. The worst thing that can happen is you won't like this and you will stop doing it. The best thing that can happen is it can lead to some amazing things. And what happened to me, I was in junior high school, and I didn't want to write. And I had this teacher, it was a media specialist, and he said, DJ, we just got this thing into our school. And he called it a portable videotape recorder. Trust me, there was nothing portable about this thing. I mean, the technology in this thing we have in our phones right now, and it's way better. This thing was giant. It had wheels on it, so I guess that's why they call it portable. But it was reel-to-reel tape, and you had to thread it up, and there was a take-up reel, and then you turned it on, and the tape snapped, and you broke, and you got in trouble. But he said, you want to use this. And what I started to do at that point was, rather than write those reports that I had to do in school, is I would start making films or videotapes instead, thinking I was getting out of writing, not realizing that writing isn't just putting words on a piece of paper. Writing is coming up with ideas and coming up with concepts and just lying on your couch and thinking, wow, what if this happened? Thinking of possibilities. And there's so many different ways you can tell those stories. And I had teachers that helped me do that through film and video. And that led to film school, and it led to me making TV shows like Encyclopedia Brown, Boy Detective. We all know Encyclopedia Brown, or a lot of us know Encyclopedia. So I made the only TV version of Encyclopedia Brown. It was on HBO, of all places. And I made the show Are You Afraid of the Dark, which is on Nickelodeon for about 10 years. You know, Are You Afraid of the Dark? It's great. I love saying that. And suddenly, it's like people know it again because it's on Teen Nick. It's like retro. It's like, remember those days when Nickelodeon had good shows? It's like, okay, fine. It's like, it was last week. Give me a break. But I'll never forget. I always say to young people that if you want to do something creative with your life, whatever that is, whether you're going to be a writer or a director, a painter, an architect, a clothing designer, a hairstylist, you're going to hear one word more than any other word in the English language, and that word is no. Right? No, you're not good enough. No, I don't like what you did. No, we've already got something like that, thank you. No, you stink. No, you'll never make a living at this. You get that from your parents. No, no, no. Well, I'm here to tell you, you can't take no for an answer. So I got out of school, and I start writing things, and I'm getting nothing but no. No, 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 but I'm making films and whatnot. Until someone said, do you ever think about writing for kids? And I said, no. I said, who am I, Dr. Seuss? Get out of here. Give me a break. But I did, and that's when I started doing these kids' TV shows. So I did Are You Afraid of the Dark? And talk about getting no all the time. When I pitched this show to Nickelodeon, I said, okay, here's my idea. It's about a group of kids sitting around a campfire telling spooky stories. But they're really spooky. They're not like Scooby-Doo spooky, with those darn kids, it's really spooky. But we leave the campfire, and then we see the story play out, like with a vampire or the mummy. I want to see what mummy is in sign language. I don't know. I don't know what that was, but I realized it was at my expense, and that's fine. That's okay. But then we'd always come back at the end to the campfire to find out it was all made up. It was the kids making up the story. And she had this look on her face, just like, she says, oh no, you can't scare little kids. Yes, I can. And I did for about 10 years all over the world. And that gave me the opportunity to do other TV shows, like Flight 29 Down, which if you saw that show. This is great. No one ever heard of that show until High School Musical came out. You guys High School Musical fans? And now I've got to watch Dancing with the Stars, because one of the guys from my show, Flight 29 Down, is one of the dancers on Dancing with the Stars now, and he's good, which means he's going to be on for like 8 weeks. I'm like, ugh, and I got to watch Dancing with the Stars, which is a great show. But then I had an idea. And it was kind of too big for a movie and too expensive for a TV show, so I thought, I think I'm going to write a book. And so I sat down to outline this book. And I always write outlines. When I was in school, I would never write outlines, because the teacher would say, write an outline. And I'd say, wait a minute, you want me to write an outline, then you want me to write the report? That's like 2 reports. But it truly isn't. It makes writing so much easier. And I don't even want to call it an outline. It just means I laid down on the couch and thought a story through. And through that process, I realized this is more than just a book. This is 10 books. So I put a whole presentation together, and I took it to my management company, and I said, my TV management company, and I said, I want to write a book series. What do you think? Guess what this guy said? No. But by that point, I took my own advice. So I was like, okay, thank you very much. Give me that back. And I went to the next office, and I said, what do you think? This guy said, maybe. Maybe is better than no, unless it comes from your parents. Right? It's like, can we go to the movies tonight? Maybe. You're not going to the movies. Just saying, you're not going to the movies tonight. But in this case, maybe it was good because about a year later, the first Pendragon book was published, Pendragon, the Merchant of Death. And I didn't think this was going to get published, let alone be successful. And it became like this international bestseller. And it allowed me to do The Monster Princess, which is a picture book. It allowed me to do Morpheus Road, which is a supernatural thing. And then it allowed me to do my new book, Sylo, which just came out a little while ago. And I'm going to talk to you about this in a couple seconds. But so all this stuff existed because I had a couple of teachers that I listened to who knew a little bit more about me than I knew about myself. And it wasn't just this one teacher. It was also a writing teacher in college who said, DJ, you've been writing all along and not realizing you're doing it. And teachers that allowed me to make these videos. So I have them to thank for standing here right now. So my advice to a lot of young students, again, like I said, take a chance. If a teacher says, try something, just try it. You never know what it's going to lead to. And also because I didn't take no for an answer, and believe me, I heard it all the time. I continue to hear it all the time. I'm the big best-selling author. People tell me no every day. Now, okay, let's talk about Sylo. Has anyone read this yet? Anybody read the book yet? No. You're 10 pages through it. Okay, well, I'll tell you the rest of the story. So then what happens? I'm going to sound like an old guy now because I'm an old guy. But speaking to the young people in the audience now, you guys, you don't know how good you've got it. You young'uns. And what I mean by that is when I was your age, when I was younger, the wealth of really fun, interesting fiction written for this age group just did not exist. At least it didn't exist to the extent that it does today. Certainly plenty of books existed back in the day. But now, thanks to this guy with a wand, suddenly all these amazing books have been written over the past 10, 15 years that just didn't exist back then. My standard joke is that when I was really young, from a reading point of view, I went from Dr. Seuss to Dr. No, which is James Bond. There was like no in between. I went from can you eat them, Sam I am, to do you think I'll talk, Goldfinger? You know, it's big. But nowadays, you have all these amazing books that, frankly, adults read them too. Let's not kid ourselves here. Come on, yeah. And it's because there's this amazing, whether it's fantasy or science fiction or real life stuff, there's stuff that's written, just really good storytelling. But with Sylo, which is kind of, Pendragon was a fantasy adventure. Morpheus, and is a fantasy adventure. Morpheus Road is a supernatural, it's adventure, it's a ghost story. Sylo is a science fiction thriller with emphasis on the thriller, and it's an adventure too. What I'd like to do, if you don't mind, I'd like to read to you the first 5 pages of this book, which is less than half of what she's read. It's just the first chapter. And for you, do we have people who like to write here? Do we have kids or writers or whatnot? What I want you to do, besides hopefully enjoying this first chapter, I want you to think about what I'm doing with this chapter. Because nowadays, when everything is so fast, you guys have your fingers on the mouse. It's like if those YouTube videos are no longer 90 seconds, click. Or you have the TV channel, click, 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 click. Suddenly, books are changing. We as authors have to grab your attention very, very quickly. Whether it's in the first line, the first 2 lines, the first paragraph, the first chapter. We've got to grab your attention to make you say, okay, I'll continue to turn those pages. And that's what I want you to see in this first chapter. Hopefully I've done that for you. Because in this 5.5 pages, it takes me 5 minutes to read it. In this first 5.5 pages, I have hopefully tweaked your interest a little bit. I've introduced our main character. You learn his personality and kind of his points of view. You get to know the setting for the story. And you get to set up a big mystery that makes you say, whoa, what's happening here? All in the first 5.5 pages. I once read a review of one of my books that it was a young person who read it, who wrote the review. I think it was a young person. And they said, this book was really slow to get started. I thought, uh-oh, here we go. Then the next line was, but after the first 10 pages, it really took off. That's barely the title page. Give me a break. But that speaks to how quickly we have to kind of get the story rocking. So here I'm going to read the first chapter, the first 5.5 pages of Sylo. And so hopefully you'll enjoy it, but also think of it, put that third eye out there and think of the things that I'm trying to do with this first chapter to hopefully entice you into reading more than the first chapter. Okay, here we go. Chapter 1. It was the perfect night for a football game and for death. Okay, then on chapter 2, what happens is, who am I, James Patterson? I've never said that in public before. Oh my God. Oh, I'm in trouble now. It's like this chapter is 2 pages long. No. Am I wrong? Okay. It was the perfect night. It was the perfect night for a football game and for death. Not that the two have anything in common. When you hear the term sudden death, you normally don't expect there to be an actual loss of life, sudden or otherwise. But there was nothing normal about that night. It was the night it began, the night of the death, the first death. I was sitting on the end of the team bench, more interested in the cheerleaders than the game. To be honest, I didn't have much business being on the team. There weren't many freshmen on the Arbortown High varsity, but with a student population that barely squeaked past 200, if you had 2 legs and didn't mind being brutally punished by guys who were older, bigger, and faster than you, you were in. Not exactly sure why I accepted the role of living tackling dummy, but I liked football and figured that in a few years I'd be the one running over hapless freshmen. So I guess I was paying my dues. My main duty during a game was to be the sprinter on the kickoff team. That meant I had to run directly for the guy who fielded the kick, which made me the first to get taken out by the wall of blockers who were intent on stopping that very thing. It was an ugly job, but at least it meant I'd come out of a game with a little dirt on my uniform. My other duty was to be the backup for our senior tailback, Marty Wiggins. That's why I spent most of my time on the bench watching the cheerleaders. Marty was a legend. He'd had big-time colleges sniffing around him since he was a sophomore. He was that good. But on that night, he was just sick. The stands were packed. For Arbortown High, that meant maybe 500 people. Wasn't exactly the Rose Bowl, but you wouldn't know that from the excitement Marty was generating. The place went nuts every time he got his hands on the ball because he was running over guys and knocking them aside like bowling pins. When he was tackled, which wasn't often, he took 3 players to drag him down. It was like watching a pro beating up on Pop Warner boys. He was in for most every play of the game until with only a few minutes left, he dropped down next to me on the bench to take a rare breather. He sat there, gulping air, staring back at the field. I figured his night was over, so I held my fist up for a knuckle bump and said, "Dude, awesome." Marty looked at me, and I froze. He had a fiery, wild look in his eyes that made me think for one terrifying moment that he was going to hit me. The guy was totally charged up with what? Excitement? Anger? Insanity? He didn't bump knuckles just as well. He might have broken my hand. I sat there like a fool with my fist hovering, unbumped. I didn't want to say anything else for fear he'd drive his helmet through my face. Instead, he grabbed my forearm in a grip that was so fierce I had black and blue marks the next day. "What's happening?" he whispered through gasping breaths. He said it with the disturbing mix of fear and confusion that made me believe he truly didn't understand what was going on around him or with him. What do you mean?" I asked tentatively. "Wiggins," barked Coach. Marty jumped to his feet and sprinted back into the game as if he had been launched from a catapult. I was left on the bench not knowing what had just happened. The play was called, the team went to the line. Marty was pitched the ball and he rumbled around left end for another 15 yards. All was well, Marty was fine. I chalked up his odd behavior to adrenaline and the excitement of the game and went back to my all-important cheerleader review. Arbortown is a pretty small place, so going to a high school football game was the best thing to do on Friday nights in the fall. Okay, the only thing to do. As I scanned the crowd, I saw many people I knew, including my mother and father. Dad gave me a smile and a big thumbs up. Mom wasn't as enthusiastic. She hated that I played football. Her deep frown meant she was expecting me to get injured just by sitting on the bench. I gave them a small wave, then looked away to notice a strange face in the crowd. It belonged to a man with longish blonde hair wearing a hoodie. He looked like a surfer dude, complete with beard stubble and a single earring. He stood out amid the sea of fans because he was the only one not cheering. Instead, he wrote furiously in a small notebook. I figure he might have been a college scout who would explain why Marty was playing like he was possessed. This could be a scholarship showcase for him. "Button up," Coach ordered as he strode past. "We're going to score again." That meant all the wretched scrubs, like me, had to be ready for another kickoff. We were on the 10-yard line and about to go in. There were only a few seconds left in the game, and I was surprised that seeing it was a blowout, Coach hadn't pulled Marty. Maybe he didn't know there was a scout in the crowd taking notes. Or maybe he didn't trust Marty's backup, me. I stood up with the rest of the team and cheered for the offense. It felt cheesy to be screaming for another score since the game had been over since halftime. What can you do? It's football. The team came up to the line. The QB called signals. The ball was snapped. Marty took the handoff, no big surprise, and blasted into the line off right tackle. The defense had had enough. They didn't want any part of him. There were a few half-hearted arm tackles that didn't even slow him down as he burst into the end zone. Touchdown. The crowd exploded once again, cheering ecstatically while the band kicked in with our fight song, Jericho. The cheerleaders jumped around and hugged each other like we just won a championship, and all we'd done was add pad to an already lopsided score. Marty sprinted to the back of the end zone, turned to the stands, threw his arms up in triumph, and dropped dead. Of course, I didn't know that at the time. All I saw was Marty fall over and land on his back. At first, I thought it was some new kind of celebration dance, like spiking himself instead of the ball. Our players were jumping on each other, chest bumping and high-fiving. When they finally got around to focusing on the guy who was the cause of the celebration, they pulled on his arms to help him up. Marty didn't respond. In seconds, the emotion of the moment flipped from elation to concern. "Hey," our guys yelled, "he's hurt." The crowd noise died instantly. It was a rude jolt to experience the sudden and dramatic change from joyous cheers and music to absolute silence. Coach sprinted onto the field, waving at the other players to back away. He was quickly joined by a paramedic. With the rest of our offense huddled nearby, watching expectantly, the paramedic knelt down to examine Marty. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that something serious had happened to our superstar. As he lay still on the grass, 2 more paramedics ran onto the field with a fracture board. I turned around to look at my parents. Dad's expression now matched Mom's. They knew something horrible had happened. Everyone knew. A few seconds later, we heard the urgent scream of a far-off siren. I didn't look back to the field right away because I was mesmerized by the communal look of anxiety and horror on the faces of each and every person in the stands. All eyes were on the end zone and the guy who lay on his back, not moving. People cleared a path for Marty's dad, who pushed his way through to get to the field. The poor guy was about to find out that his son had just gone from playing the game of his life to taking the final breath of his life. Every last person feared they were witnessing something horrific, something they would never forget. Nobody moved as they waited for the news they knew wouldn't be good. Almost nobody, that is. As I stared at the stands, I noticed that one person had already left. He hadn't even stuck around long enough for the ambulance to arrive. The surfer dude with the notebook was gone. It was the night of the death, the first death, and it was only the beginning. That's the first chapter of Sylo. So, thank you. So, for those, next. What, couldn't handle it, too tired? No. Welcome. So, for those of you who know my writing, you know that I write for people who like to read. Duh. And what I mean by that is you've read a lot of books. So what I like to do is I like to take you down the garden path. This book is not about football. I like to take you down so you think you know exactly what's going to happen, because you're like, oh yeah, I've read this before. Okay, oh, it's a football book. Okay, fine. But then I take a turn. It's like, okay, fine. Whoa, we're going that way. Okay, let's go that way a little bit. Nope, we're going that way now. Now we're going up. Now we're going down. What Sylo is about, essentially, is that in the very second chapter, Tucker, who is the main character, it was his voice, he goes on a midnight ride around this island where they live with his friend Quinn, and he sees this mysterious aircraft floating over the island that explodes. No one else has seen this. A day later, the island is invaded by a branch of the Navy called Sylo. The President of the United States gets on TV and says, we are quarantining Pendragon Island. That's where they live. There is a virus on this island. If you're there on vacation, you're not getting off. If you live there and you went to the mainland for shoes, you're not getting back on until we figure out what's happening on on Pendragon Island. Now, this is a trilogy, and that's the very beginning of the book. there's a lot more going on than meets the eye here. And it's up to Tucker and his friends to figure out what's going on, because they soon realize there's a conspiracy going on here that starts with Sylo, that goes to the local police department, that goes to their parents, that says, you're not being protected here, you're being held prisoner. And that's really where Sylo takes off. And it's a science fiction kind of crazy fantasy thriller, and that's what Sylo's about. If you like that kind of thing, Sylo's for you. Okay, we have a couple of minutes left. We have any questions about anything? Questions about books, about TV, about movies, about football, even though the movie's not about football. Come on, there must be something here someplace. Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah, go up to the mic, I think. Oh, get in line. Okay, go for it. Oh, yeah, there's mics, so get in line if you have a question. Okay, go ahead.
So I've been kind of consuming your media since I was a little kid. I watched Are You Afraid of the Dark and then graduated to Pendragon when that came out.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really interesting to me about Pendragon and YA in general is that over the 10 books, the series kind of matures, as a lot of the readers do. Because you start reading it when you're young, and then the 10th book comes out and you're in high school and you have kind of a different view. So you said you entered in knowing you were going to write 10 books. How did you plan the changes that would happen over the books? Did you intend to have this deepening maturity, or did it just happen as the characters developed? Like, how do you walk in saying, I'm going to write 10 books, and walk out actually having written 10 books?
10 books. It was planned and it wasn't planned. I mean, I outlined all 10 books. I didn't, and the plan always was, ideally, now all 10 books are out right now, so this doesn't quite count anymore. My idea was, just like you said, people who are 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 years old will start, and they'll grow up along with Bobby Pendragon. What I didn't necessarily plan was this deepening maturity of the books. What I learned over the course of it is that when you're writing one story, and these aren't comedies, when you're writing one story, there's a lot that's going on here. It happens naturally. It came out in the story itself. Even though I didn't say, okay, the 10th book is going to be much more mature than the first book, it kind of happens. It's inevitable that it becomes, because as the story grows and becomes deeper, becomes stronger, that happens. And I'll give you a good example. For those of you who've read all 10 Pendragon books, there's a character named Spader who everyone loves, because he's this happy-go-lucky guy who's always saying, ho-be-ho, and all this kind of stuff. And he's in the first couple of books. Then he goes away for several books. Then he came back towards the end, and I had trouble writing his voice, because I couldn't suddenly insert this happy-go-lucky type character. He didn't fit with the tone of the books anymore. So I had to give him a much more reserved role. And there was no better example of what you just described than that. So I think it's the nature of storytelling. The fact that it's such a long story, the story itself matures, so therefore the level and the deepening of the writing happens. It just came naturally.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay, let's go over to this side. Go.
Oh my gosh. Oh my
Did you forget?
No, I didn't. Oh my gosh, I just love your book so much.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Well, when I first started reading the Pendragon series, I was living on a sports site in Naples, Italy, and they were just lying there in the top shelf of my teacher's closet, and I said, "Can I read those?" She's like, "Oh, go ahead."
Yeah, please.
And so I pulled them down, and I started reading them, and I had no idea who you were at the time, and I could only get my hands on those 4 books until we moved back, and then I was able to get my hands on more of them. I think I have 6. So I just want to ask you, it's such a complex and amazing series. I don't know how you do it, and can you tell me, is there any sort of motivation, and can you give me some tips?
Very good. Yes, wow. I love that. Can I take you on tour with me?
Sure.
All my stories are very heavily plotted. So it goes back to what I said before about the outlines. I literally outlined all 10 Pendragon books in 1 week. Now, one of the reasons Pendragon existed is because I had the ideas for a lot of different stories and couldn't decide which one to write, so I decided to write them all and weave them together with the story of Bobby and the Travelers. So that 10-story outline that I just described really was Bobby's story of the major events that happened with him. And he slotted into each individual conflict that happens in each one of the books. So I don't think I'll ever write another 10-book series. It just kind of happened. But the best advice I can give you about writing is you have to write about things that you know and you're familiar with. Write about people and things and places and events and conflicts and emotions. Because when you're writing about things that you know, you'll be writing with authority and readers will respond to it. Now you may say to me, well, you don't battle quigs and jump through flumes, give me a break. And I don't, maybe. But at the core of the story is the personal story about Bobby, what it's like to leave home, what it's like to move. I moved away from my home in Connecticut to live in California. And there's a lot of stuff that goes along with that, where you're like, you leave your family and friends behind. You feel displaced. You feel alone. So I try to put a lot of that into Bobby's story. So that is the real live stuff that's in there. You have to have really interesting, good characters so that when they then get involved with Quigs and Flumes, then you're really with them. So write about things that you know. That's the main thing.
One more thing. How many times have you gotten letters from parents saying, "You scared my children to death with your stories"?
I don't. It's odd.
You don't?
Remember I said to that woman from Nickelodeon, said, you can't scare little kids. The reason I can is because parents are okay with it.
That is very surprising.
I don't know what that's saying. I'll tell you the biggest complaint I get, and I get this over and over and over again, my kid won't go to sleep. It's like they're staying up all night, they have school the next day, they can't put the book down. It's a good problem to have, but that's the main complaint I get. Okay, let's go over here.
Well, you join a long line of storytellers like the Brothers Grimm as far as scaring people goes. But I want to thank you as a mom and as a teacher and as a librarian for adding to the young adult genre as a whole, and for writing like very deep books that you can get into about ethics, about friendship, about situational ethics, and growing as a person. And you can read it at various times of your life and get completely different things out of it. You know, like reading Tolkien all your life, you get something different. And I just personally want to thank you on behalf of me, my students, and my son.
Thank you very much. That's very, and you're both going to be going on tour with me. I'll tell you, if there's one theme, one common theme that goes through all of my writing, I'm afraid this is going to be my last question. I've been talking too much. It's the concept of self-empowerment. I always put young people into a situation, a challenge, and then I cut off their avenues to get help. When you're in trouble, first thing you do, you go to your parents. I usually take the parents out of the picture. Bambi's mom dies. Then they go to the police. The police are part of it. I go here, they can't do it. So doors are constantly being closed in front of them until they realize there's only one person that can help me, and that's me. And that's what happens, whether it's Pendragon or Morpheus Road or Sylo as well. Tucker Pierce in this thing, he's just going through life. He's like, life's fine. I don't have to deal with anything. But he is confronted with this thing. He says, I've got to bring my game here. And that's, I think, a good lesson to all of us. It's about self-empowerment. I'm sorry. I guess I spoke too much, guys. I'm sorry. I'm overtime here. But I'll talk to you if you guys get your book signed. I'll be able to talk to each one of you if you get your book over at the signing on the other side. Thank you very much for listening to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.